Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sukkah. We are up to Perik Aleph Mishnah Tet. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. The Mishnah teaches the laws of a Sukkah wall that either does not reach the ground or does not reach the schach. The Mishnah begins, Hamshelshel defanot milmala lemata. In the case of one who extends walls downward from the top of the sukkah toward the bottom, meaning the wall is suspended from the top of the sukkah and does not reach the ground. Im givoa min aretz shlosha tvachim pesula. The law is that if the bottom of the wall is 3 tvachim or more above the ground, it is invalid. This is because animals the size of young goats can easily pass under it, and a wall that is unable to keep out such animals is not considered a wall. Milmata lemala, in the opposite case, where one builds a wall from the bottom of the sukkah toward the top, meaning the wall is built from the ground up and does not reach the schach. Im givoa min haaretz 10 tefachim kishara. The law is that if the top of the wall is 10 tefachim above the ground, it is valid because we viewed the wall as though it extends all the way up to the schach. Now, it does not matter how far the top of the wall is from the schach, the Rav explains. Now, if a wall is 10 tefachim high, which is the minimum for a valid partition, we can treat it as though it were much higher. This is an application of the rule known as Gud Asik Mechitzata, pull and raise up the wall. And the Mishnah diagrams would be diagram B and diagram C to visualize what the Mishnah is referring to. Now Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the first ruling. Rabbi Yossi says, Kishem shemilmata lemala 10 tvachim. Just as a wall built from the bottom toward the top is valid provided it is 10 tefachim high, kach milmala lemata 10 tefachim. So too a wall built from the top toward the bottom is valid if it is 10 tefachim high. Even if the bottom of the wall is far from the ground, it is valid because we viewed the wall as though it extends all the way down to the ground. Rabbi Yossi applies here the opposite rule. Gud achit mechitzata, pull and lower the wall, which states that a 10 tefach high wall can be regarded as extending downward. The Tanna Kamara disagrees. In his view, if goats are able to walk freely underneath it, we cannot regard it as a wall at all. And the Rav does tell us, Ve'en alachak Rabbi Yossi, the alachah does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Now, having discussed the laws of a vertical gap in a sukkah wall, the Mishnah now speaks of a horizontal gap in the schach. Hirchik et hasikuch mina defanot 3 tvachim pesula. If one distant the schach 3 tvachim from one of the walls, leaving a strip of empty space that is 3 tvachim wide between the schach and the wall, the sukkah is invalid. This is because the gap separates the wall from the sukkah, so that the wall is no longer considered part of the sukkah. Now, the Mishnah refers to a sukkah that has only 3 walls, which is the minimum for a sukkah, like we saw in Mishnah 1. Therefore, if one of the walls is not considered part of the sukkah, only 2 walls remain and the sukkah is invalid. The diagram is brought down in note 4 and the article elucidated. But if the sukkah has 4 walls, it is valid on account of the 3 that remain. If the gap between the wall and the schach is narrower than 3 tefachim, the wall is still part of the sukkah because the rule of Lavut tells us that such a gap is considered closed. A person is nevertheless forbidden to eat or sleep under the empty space since he is not covered by valid schach. Now, the commentaries discuss a different point which we're not going to get into, but just to quickly say it out, the rule of dofen akuma, bent wall, which we're going to see later on, is not relevant here. That rule applies only where the wall is separated from the valid schach by solid materials which become part of the wall, creating a bent wall. But in our case, the wall is separated from the schach by empty space more than 3 tefachim wide, which cannot be considered part of a wall. Therefore, the wall is indeed detached from the sukkah. The commentators are dealing with why dofen akuma doesn't apply here. Again, we're going to discuss it b'linei b'ezrat Hashem later on when we get into this topic more. And that is the end of Mishnah Tet. Now, Mishnah Yud continues. The end of Mishnah Tet spoke of a wall that is horizontally separated from the schach by empty space. Mishnah Yud now deals with the horizontal gap that is not empty, but is filled with invalid materials. The Mishnah gives 3 examples. Bait shenifchat, if the roof of a house partially collapsed, so that there is a hole in the middle of the roof, but the sides of the roof next to the walls are intact. If isikech al gabav, and one placed schach over the hole, im yesh min hakotel hasikuch 400 pesula. The law is that if there is a distance of 4 amot from the walls to the schach, it is an invalid sukkah, because the intact parts of the roof which are unfit for schach separate the walls from the schach, leaving the sukkah without walls. Now, why is it unfit for schach? Because it was built as the roof of a house and not schach. Now, it's brought down in a diagram in note 2 in the article Seder. Now, a wall that is separated from the schach by a 4 amma wide strip of invalid material is not considered part of the sukkah. Therefore, if the sukkah has only 2 walls besides this one, it is disqualified since it lacks the minimum number of 3 walls. However, if the sukkah has 4 walls, it is valid on account of its remaining 3 walls. Now, Mishnah states that the distance between the wall and the valid schach is 4 amot. If the distance were less than 4 amot, the wall would not be considered separate from the sukkah, because the rule of dofen akuma, bent wall, that allows us to view the wall as bending at the top and extending all the way to the valid schach. However, this bent wall is limited to a horizontal distance of 4 amot. A distance of 4 amot is too great for the wall to be linked to the sukkah, even in this manner. Now, even if the invalid schach is less than 4 amot wide and does not disqualify the sukkah, one cannot fulfill the mitzvah by sitting under it. The second example, v'chen chatzer she'it mukefet achsadra. Similarly, if one puts schach over the open part of a courtyard that is surrounded by a roofed porch. Now, the courtyard is surrounded by houses. In front of each house, there is a roof that extends over part of the courtyard. The rest of the courtyard is open to the sky. A sukkah was created by placing schach over the open part of the courtyard, with the walls of the houses being the walls of the sukkah. This is brought down in a diagram in note 3. The sukkah, therefore, the sukkah that is formed is invalid if there is a distance of 4 amot from the walls to the schach. And the third and final example, sukkah gedola shikifua bedavar shel mesakichim bo. If the schach of a large sukkah is surrounded by material that may not be used as schach. Now, this refers to a sukkah whose valid schach, beside the invalid materials, covers an area of at least 7 by 7 tvachim, which is the minimum for a sukkah. Since the area under the invalid schach is not considered part of the sukkah, the valid schach must be large enough on its own. So if the schach of a large sukkah in this case is surrounded by material that may not be used as schach, im yesh tachtav arba amot pisula, the law is that if there is a distance of 4 amot beneath the invalid schach, the sukkah is invalid. Now, this is brought down in diagram A in note 5. All the Mishnah's cases are of invalid schach that is at the side of the sukkah. If a strip of invalid schach runs through the middle of the sukkah, meaning more than 4 amot from the walls, where the principle of dofen akuma does not apply, it divides the sukkah into 2 parts. Therefore, if the sukkah is made with 3 walls, each part is invalid because it now has only 2 walls. However, even a strip of invalid schach that runs through the middle of a sukkah does not divide it unless a strip is at least 4 tvachim wide, brought down in diagram B. Now, we learned in the previous Mishnah that a gap of empty space at the side of a sukkah separates the adjacent wall from the sukkah, even if the gap is only 3 tvachim wide. The same is true of such a gap that runs through the middle of a sukkah. It divides the sukkah into 2, even if it is only 3 tvachim wide. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.